The morning I posted 43 folding tables, 216 metal chairs, 8 industrial canopy tents, 4 commercial propane grills, and 1 riding lawnmower on Facebook Marketplace for free pickup. I had already been awake for 2 hours, already had the listings written, already had the photographs taken, and was sitting on my porch with coffee watching the sun come up over my pasture with the particular satisfaction of a man who has read every relevant statute, confirmed every legal position 3 times, and is completely certain about what he is about to do. The first message came in 4 minutes after I hit post. By 7 in the morning, I had 63 messages. By 9, I had a line of pickup trucks down my gravel driveway. By 11, the barn was empty. Renee Copeland found out at 11:47 when she pulled up to the barn in her HOA board president polo shirt and found nothing inside but a swept concrete floor, 2 barn cats who lived there permanently, and a handwritten note on the door that said, "Items removed per property rights. Contact an attorney." I was watching from the house. She stood at that empty barn door for a long time. I poured another cup of coffee. My name is Henry Briggs. I am 55 years old, retired electrician, part-time cattle farmer, and full-time owner of a 40-acre property outside of Bowling Green, Kentucky, that my wife Clara and I have lived on for 23 years. The property has a farmhouse, a main barn, a smaller equipment shed, 3 pasture sections, and about 11 acres of timber on the back end that I have never touched because my grandfather always said a man should leave something for whoever comes after him. I am not a member of any homeowners association. I want to be clear about that because it is the foundation of everything that follows. I am not now, have never been, and under the terms of my property deed, have no legal obligation to be a member of any HOA. My property predates every residential development within 4 miles of it. My deed contains no HOA covenant, no CC&R attachment, no voluntary association clause of any kind. I am a private landowner on agricultural zoned property in Warren County, Kentucky, and the only authorities with jurisdiction over my land are the county, the state, and the federal government. Renee Copeland had a different understanding of the situation. Renee was the president of the Meadow Creek Estates HOA, which was the development that had gone up on the former farmland to my south and east over the past 6 years. 412 homes, a community center, a pool facility, and the kind of aggressive homeowners association that forms when a developer installs the initial board and then leaves the most energetic resident to run it indefinitely. Renee had been that resident. She was in her early 50s, had moved in during the first wave of Meadow Creek construction, and had been HOA president for 4 years with the specific authority of someone who had never once been told no by anyone in her immediate orbit. My property sat on the northern boundary of Meadow Creek Estates. My main barn, which I had built 12 years ago with my own hands and my brother's help over 3 weekends, sat about 200 yards from the subdivision fence line. From certain angles and certain roads, it was visible from the development. This apparently bothered Renee. The first letter arrived 3 years ago. It was on Meadow Creek Estates HOA letterhead, signed by Renee as president, and it informed me that my barn's exterior did not conform to the community's aesthetic standards and that I was required to paint it within 60 days or face daily fines. I read the letter twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I called the HOA's listed phone number and asked to speak with Renee. She came on the line with the practiced warmth of someone who manages people for a living and said she was glad I had called and that she hoped we could work together on community harmony. I told her I was not a member of her HOA. She said all properties adjacent to Meadow Creek Estates were considered community adjacent and subject to the exterior standards guidelines as a condition of the development's original county approval. I told her that was not how property law worked and asked her to send me the specific county approval document she was referencing. She said it was on file with the county and that she would have her administrative assistant forward it. No document ever arrived. Instead, 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one said my barn was producing odors inconsistent with residential adjacency standards and that I needed to submit a livestock management plan for board review within 30 days. I kept both letters in a folder and called a property attorney named Dennis Holt, who had an office in Bowling Green and whose name I had gotten from the Kentucky Farm Bureau. Dennis read both letters and said what I already knew, which was that Renee had no legal authority over my property whatsoever, and that the community-adjacent language she was using had no basis in county approval documents or any statute he was aware of. He wrote a letter to Renee on my behalf. Clean, professional, 1 page. It said I was not subject to HOA jurisdiction, that the letters she had sent had no legal foundation, and that continued correspondence asserting authority over my property would be treated as harassment. Renee's response came back in 10 days. She thanked Dennis for his letter and said the board had reviewed the matter and maintained its position. She also mentioned that the HOA was in the process of filing a formal request with the county planning office to clarify the adjacency standards as they applied to my property. Dennis said she's going to try to manufacture authority through the county process. I asked what we should do. He said we should attend the county planning meeting where that request would be heard and bring the deed and every piece of documentation we had. We attended. Dennis spoke. The county planning director, a thorough man named Gary Ostrowski, who had been in the position for 18 years and who had clearly seen this kind of thing before, told the board representative who had come to make Renee's case that agricultural properties in Warren County were not subject to residential HOA jurisdiction under any county approval process he was aware of, and that if the HOA believed otherwise, they were welcome to file a civil action to test that position. The HOA did not file a civil action. But Renee did not stop. Over the following 18 months, I received 11 more letters, roof visibility complaints, equipment noise complaints, complaints about my cattle being visible from the subdivision walking path, a complaint about a work light I had on the barn exterior that Renee said created light pollution affecting Meadow Creek residents, a complaint about my tractor operating before 8 in the morning, which is when farmers operate tractors. Each one Dennis addressed, each one the same result. Then Renee changed tactics. I found out about the change from my neighbor to the west, a man named Carl Dutton who ran a small hay operation and who kept me informed about things happening along our shared fence line because Carl was the kind of neighbor every rural property owner should have. Carl told me on a Thursday afternoon that he had seen a Meadow Creek HOA truck, one of those white utility vehicles with the subdivision logo on the door, parked on the road that ran along my southern boundary 2 days in a row, and that the people in it appeared to be measuring distances and taking photographs of my barn. I asked Carl if he had gotten a plate number. He had. I gave it to Dennis. Dennis ran the plate and confirmed it was a vehicle registered to the Meadow Creek Estates HOA Property Management Company. I checked my own cameras, which covered the southern boundary. The footage confirmed what Carl had described: 2 individuals on 2 separate days, photographing and measuring in the public right-of-way adjacent to my property. I told Dennis. He said they're building a file. For what purpose, I don't know yet. I found out 4 weeks later when a certified letter arrived from a law firm in Nashville that I had never heard of. The letter said the firm represented Meadow Creek Estates HOA and that the HOA had engaged them to pursue a formal nuisance action against my property based on documented evidence of exterior blight, odor generation, noise violation, and light pollution affecting the residential community. A nuisance action. Dennis read the letter carefully and said 2 things. First, that a nuisance action against an agricultural property in Kentucky faced significant legal obstacles under the state's Right to Farm Act, which provided strong protections for agricultural operations. Second, that the Nashville law firm was real and not cheap, and that someone had decided to spend real money on this. He asked me to think about why someone would spend that kind of money on a nuisance action against a 40-acre farm that had been operating legally for 23 years. I thought about it. I also did something that Dennis had not asked me to do, but that I had been trained to do over 35 years of electrical work, which was to trace things back to their source when the visible explanation didn't make complete sense. I went to the Warren County Property Records Office and pulled every transaction involving land adjacent to my property over the prior 3 years. What I found took me a few minutes to understand fully. A company called Southern Meadowland Partners had purchased a narrow strip of land on my eastern boundary 14 months prior. The strip was 50 feet wide and ran the full length of my eastern fence line. It had been carved out of a larger parcel through a survey subdivision that I had not been notified about, because I had no legal right to notification for transactions on adjacent property. I took that to Dennis. Dennis looked at the purchase records for Southern Meadowland Partners. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked up and said, "Henry, the registered agent for Southern Meadowland Partners is the same law firm that just sent you the nuisance letter." I sat with that. Dennis said, "And the managing member of the LLC, the one whose name is on the operating agreement, is a man named Paul Copeland." I asked if Paul Copeland was related to Renee Copeland. Dennis said, "Her husband." That was the first real twist. Not an HOA president with too much time and a preference for community aesthetics. A coordinated land play. The nuisance action was designed to pressure me. The land strip purchase was the reason. If my property could be characterized as a nuisance, if the farm operation could be made legally problematic, the pressure to sell or settle would come with it. And if I sold or settled, Southern Meadowland Partners, run by Renee's husband, was positioned right on my eastern boundary to be part of whatever came next. I told Dennis I needed a minute. He said, "Take your time." I sat in his office, looking at the documents, and thought about 23 years on that property, the barn I had built with my brother, the cattle my grandfather had first run on those pastures, the timber on the back end that I had never touched. Then I thought about something else. About a conversation I had had with Renee's HOA administrative assistant, a young woman named Brianna, who had called me once to schedule what Renee described as a community liaison meeting, and who had mentioned, in the way that people mention things they think are routine, that the HOA was looking for additional storage for community event equipment because the community center storage rooms were full. I had not thought much about that conversation at the time. I thought about it now, because approximately 6 weeks after that conversation, I had found the first items in my barn. Not my items. Folding tables, metal chairs, an industrial canopy tent, stacked neatly against the east wall of my main barn, taking up space I used for equipment storage, with a handwritten tag on the tent that said Meadow Creek HOA Event Supplies. I had assumed at the time that there had been some kind of mistake, a delivery error. Someone had put things in the wrong barn. I had called the HOA office and left a message saying the items needed to be picked up. No one came. 2 weeks later there were more items, 6 more tables, a commercial propane grill, Maury chairs, and a note, not a message, not a delivery receipt, a note on the same HOA letterhead that Renee used for her violation letters that said, "Thank you for accommodating community storage needs. We appreciate the partnership." The partnership. I had not agreed to any partnership. I had not been asked about any partnership. Someone had been using my barn as HOA storage without my knowledge or consent, and when I had called to have the original items removed, the response had been to add more items and characterize the whole arrangement as an agreement I had apparently made without knowing about it. I called Dennis that evening. He said, "How long has this been going on?" I told him what I knew. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Henry, do you know what trespass to chattels means?" I said I had a general idea. He said it means using someone's property without their permission, and what you're describing is not a storage mistake. It's an ongoing unauthorized occupation of your barn. I asked him what the legal position was on my right to remove the items. He said, "It's your barn. Those are not your items. You have every right to remove unauthorized property from your own barn." I asked whether I needed to notify anyone first. He said I should send a written notice giving a reasonable time to retrieve the items, and that if they were not retrieved within that time, I could deal with them as I chose. I sent the notice the next morning, certified letter to Renee at the HOA office and to the Nashville law firm. Items in my barn without authorization. Remove within 72 hours or I would exercise my property rights. 72 hours passed. Nobody came. I counted the items on the morning of the 73rd hour. 43 folding tables, 216 metal chairs, 8 industrial canopy tents, 4 commercial propane grills, 1 riding lawnmower with a Meadow Creek HOA tag on the seat. I went inside and opened Facebook Marketplace. End of Part 1, approximately 6,900 words. Part 2. HOA Karen filled my barn with HOA supplies, so I put everything online for free pickup. The Facebook Marketplace listings went live at 5:47 in the morning. I had spent the prior evening writing them carefully. Each listing had a photograph I had taken that morning with my phone, a brief accurate description of the item, the condition noted as used but functional, the price listed as free, and a pickup location listed as my address with a note that said first come first served, no holds, bring your own help to load. I had photographed each item individually and then done a wide shot of the full barn interior showing the volume of material stacked along the east and south walls. I used the wide shot as the lead image on the lawnmower listing because it was the most striking image and I knew it would generate the most shares. Dennis had confirmed the night before, in a phone call I had recorded with his knowledge, that my legal position was clean. Written notice had been sent, certified mail, documented delivery. 72 hours had elapsed. The items were on my private property without authorization. My right to exercise dominion over my own barn was not in question. He had also said something else that I had written down. He said, "Henry, be prepared for this to get loud very fast." I told him I was prepared. He said, "And document everything from the moment the first person arrives. Timestamps, names if people give them, photographs." I had my phone charged and my camera system running. The first message on Facebook came in at 5:51. A man named Gary asking if the tables were still available and whether he could come at 6:30. I said yes. By 6:15, I had 22 messages. By 7, I had the first 3 trucks in the driveway. Gary and 2 other men I didn't know, all of them polite, all of them loading tables and chairs with the efficient energy of people who have been given something for free and want to collect it before someone changes their mind. I sat on the porch and documented arrivals, timestamps, vehicle descriptions, approximate item counts removed, not because I needed the documentation for legal purposes at that point, though it turned out I did, but because 35 years of electrical work had made documentation a reflex I no longer needed to think about. By 8:30, the canopy tents were gone. By 9, the propane grills were loaded onto a flatbed belonging to a man named Thomas, who said he ran a barbecue catering operation and could not believe his luck. I told him it was his lucky morning. He said, "God bless you, sir," and drove away. The riding lawnmower went at 9:47 to a retired couple who arrived in a trailer with a loading ramp already attached, which told me they had done this before, and I respected the preparation. At 10:15, the last of the folding chairs left in the bed of a pickup, driven by a woman who said she ran a church fellowship hall and had been trying to replace their chairs for 2 years. I told her I hoped they served the fellowship well. She said they surely would. At 11:03, I swept the barn floor because the barn floor sweeping had been on my list for 2 weeks, and the barn was now empty enough to do it properly. The 2 barn cats watched from the hay loft. I swept the full floor, got the debris into the disposal bin, and was washing my hands at the outdoor spigot when Renee Copeland's white HOA utility vehicle turned up my gravel driveway. I dried my hands on my work pants and stood by the barn door. She parked, got out, walked to where I was standing, looked past me into the empty barn, and did not say anything for a moment that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. Then she said, "Where is everything?" I said, "Gone." She said, "What do you mean, gone?" I said, "Removed. The barn is empty." She looked at the floor, freshly swept. 2 barn cats. No folding tables, no canopy tents, no commercial propane grills, no riding lawnmower. She said those were HOA property. I said they were unauthorized items stored in my barn without my consent. I sent a certified notice 72 hours ago requesting their removal. They were not removed. I exercised my property rights. She said, "You can't just give away HOA property." I said the items on my property without authorization were subject to my dominion as the property owner and that I had handled them accordingly. She said, "Do you have any idea what those items cost?" I said I had photographed each item before removing it and could provide her with documentation of what had been in the barn if that was useful. She took out her phone. I went back to the porch. She made 4 calls in the next 20 minutes that I could see from where I was sitting. After the 4th call, she walked to her vehicle, sat in it for a moment, then drove back down the driveway without speaking to me again. I called Dennis. He said, "How did it go?" I told him. He said she called the Nashville firm. I'd expect a letter by end of week. The letter arrived in 3 days. It was aggressive in the way that letters are aggressive when the person directing them is panicked rather than strategic. It accused me of conversion of property, which is the civil tort for wrongfully taking or disposing of someone else's property. It demanded immediate return of all items or replacement value in the amount of $31,400, which was apparently what the HOA had paid for the equipment over 3 years of community events. It threatened criminal referral for theft. Dennis's response letter was 7 pages. He documented the unauthorized entry of items into my barn with no consent and no agreement. He documented the note on HOA letterhead characterizing the arrangement as a partnership I had never agreed to. He documented my certified removal notice and the delivery confirmation. He documented the 72-hour window and its expiration. He cited the Kentucky statute on abandoned property and the common law doctrine of unauthorized bailment. He cited 3 cases involving unauthorized storage on private property. And he noted that the threat of criminal referral for theft was legally frivolous given that the removal of unauthorized items from one's own property did not meet any element of the theft statute. Then he filed a counter-complaint. The counter-complaint was the one I had been building toward since the nuisance action letter had arrived from the Nashville firm. It named Renee Copeland personally, Paul Copeland personally, Southern Meadowland Partners, the Meadow Creek Estates HOA, and the Nashville law firm. It alleged a coordinated scheme to pressure a private agricultural landowner through a combination of fraudulent HOA authority claims, manufactured nuisance litigation, strategic land acquisition by a connected party, and unauthorized occupation of private property structures. Dennis said, "This is the complaint where everything connects." He was right. The letters over 3 years, the county planning maneuver, the nuisance action, the land purchase by Renee's husband's LLC, the barn storage, all of it in one filing, documented and dated and connected by a thread that ran from Renee's first letter about barn paint to her husband's name on an LLC operating agreement. The Nashville firm withdrew from representing the HOA within 2 weeks of being named as a defendant. I do not know exactly what happened in the conversations that preceded that withdrawal. I know that being named as a defendant in a complaint alleging participation in a coordinated harassment scheme changes the calculus for a law firm considerably. Renee retained personal counsel, a woman named Margaret Cross out of Nashville who had a real reputation and who called Dennis within days of being retained. Margaret was direct. She said her client's exposure was significant and that she wanted to understand the full scope of what Dennis was prepared to pursue. Dennis told her the full scope. Margaret was quiet for a moment and then said she would need time to advise her client. She called back in a week. The mediation process took 2 months. The HOA was separately represented by a new firm that had taken the case on a limited scope basis. Paul Copeland and Southern Meadowland Partners had their own counsel. The nuisance action against my property was withdrawn on the first day of mediation as a condition of proceeding, which Dennis had required before the mediation began. The settlement covered several categories. The HOA's conversion claim for the barn equipment was dismissed entirely. Dennis had established that the unauthorized storage constituted an implied abandonment under Kentucky law given the failure to respond to the certified removal notice and that my disposition of the items was within my property rights. The HOA received nothing for the equipment. My damages from the 3-year harassment campaign were assessed and settled. Legal costs across the full period, documented time costs, the nuisance action defense costs, which had been substantial. The total from the HOA came to $22,000. Paul Copeland and Southern Meadowland Partners settled the coordinated scheme allegations separately. The settlement included a payment, the recording of a formal easement in my favor on the strip of land his LLC had purchased on my eastern boundary, which effectively neutralized any future development pressure from that direction, and a recorded covenant on his LLC's operations within a mile of my property boundary. The payment from Paul and the LLC was $19,000. Combined settlement, $41,000, and a recorded easement that will run with the land for as long as my family owns it. Dennis said that easement might be worth more than the money in 20 years. I told him I thought he was right. Renee resigned from the HOA presidency as part of the settlement terms. She remained in Meadow Creek Estates. I still see her occasionally on the road when I am moving equipment between pastures. She does not wave. I do not require her to. The barn was empty for about 3 weeks before I needed the east wall space again for equipment storage. I restacked my own items along that wall, the way they had been before the folding tables arrived, and the barn went back to being what it had always been. A barn. My barn. The 2 barn cats relocated back to their preferred corners of the hay loft and resumed their operations, which consisted primarily of managing the rodent situation and sitting in sunbeams, and which had been disrupted not at all by any of what had happened, because barn cats do not concern themselves with HOA disputes. I envied them that. Clara, my wife, had been patient through the whole 3-year period in the way that she is patient about things, which is completely and without complaint, but with an occasional look that communicates clearly that her patience has a bottom and that I should be moving toward resolution. When the settlement was finalized, she read the documents and then looked at me and said, "I want a new back porch." I said that seemed reasonable. Some of the settlement money went toward the back porch. It is a good porch, wide boards, solid railing, faces west so the evening light is right. Clara drinks her coffee out there in the mornings now, and I join her when the cattle don't need anything first. Some mornings I look out from that porch toward the eastern fence line where Paul Copeland's LLC had bought that 50-foot strip, and I think about the easement recorded in the county land records, and I think about what it means to have something written into the deed that will still be there when I am not. My grandfather said to leave something for whoever comes after. The easement is something. The barn is still standing. The timber on the back end, I still have not touched. Here is what I will leave you with. There is a version of this story where I called Renee the first time those tables showed up and had a conversation and worked something out. Maybe. But the coordinated nature of what she and her husband were doing, the nuisance action, the land purchase, the manufactured partnership that was never agreed to, that was not a misunderstanding that a conversation would have resolved. That was a plan. And plans like that do not respond to accommodation. They respond to documentation and legal clarity, and the specific kind of patience that comes from being certain about what you own and what you are owed. 3 years of letters. 72-hour removal notice. One morning on Facebook Marketplace. And an empty barn that I swept clean before she arrived. That is how you answer a plan. Not with anger, not with confrontation, with records and rights and the willingness to let the law say what it says. Drop your thoughts below. If someone has treated your property like it was available for their use without asking, I want to hear it. And if you are dealing with an HOA that seems to be asserting authority it doesn't have, read your deed. Read every word of it. Because what my deed said was the first and last thing that mattered in this entire story. It said the property was mine. That was enough. End of part 2, approximately 6,800 words. Thumbnail text. She used my barn as HOA storage. I put everything on Facebook for free.